especially to those of you who have not attended a Building Bridges event before. We really appreciate that you're making time to come to today's workshop, Strategies for Productive Disagreement, which is a very enticing title. I'm Lisa Colgan, co-founder of Building Bridges, which is a program of Elders Action Network dedicated to supporting efforts to restore civil conversation among people of diverse perspectives. We meet on the third Thursday of alternate months at 12 o'clock noon Pacific, 3 o'clock p.m. for those of you on the East Coast. And our next gathering will be on May 15th, during which, as we always try to do, we hope to offer a mini training which provides an opportunity to practice the skills that we introduced during the session. Before we get started, I'd just like to give special thanks to the members of the core team who helped bring this workshop to you, especially to Meg Newhouse, who put us in touch with Florrie, to Penny Welch, who helps keep us organized and on task, and to Jan Singer for her able assistance. Thanks also to Crystal Small, who has helped us with promotion and who will be managing Zoom today. And of course, a very special thanks to our guest speaker, Florrie Darwin, for taking time out of her busy schedule to offer this workshop to us. Florrie tells me that she usually takes multiple days to cover the information she'll be sharing with us today in just 90 minutes. So you can look forward to a really jam-packed, information-filled workshop. Now I'd like to recognize Meg Newhouse, who will get us centered and then introduce our guest speaker. Meg?
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody. I thank you also for coming. And I do really think it helps because we all come from rather disparate places and are busy. Let's just take a minute, literally a minute, to get ourselves centered and grounded so we can be really present. So, however it works for you, you might want to close your eyes. You might certainly want to ground your feet and sit comfortably. And just imagine your feet are going down into the earth. And the light from the cosmos is coming down in through your crown. And then just begin to breathe with much awareness, breathing in and breathing out. And breathe in calm and peace. And breathe out all the tension and to-dos and everything that is extraneous. And breathe in the gratitude. And breathe out judgment. And true to our schedule, just with this very brief time to gather ourselves, center ourselves, be aware of the community here. Bring yourselves back to the Zoom screen. Okay, we are very fortunate that Florrie Darwin has offered this workshop to the Building Bridges and EAN at this time when it's so increasingly important for all of us to become more skilled at dealing productively with conflict, whether it be with friends and family, neighbors, colleagues, and public officials. So I'm just giving you a brief reminder that Florrie has been teaching, training, conducting negotiations, mediation, and conflict management for the past 25 years. And in law schools, other nonprofits, corporations, and governments all over the world, including in conflict areas, teaching actually all ages people. Her law degree is from Harvard, and much of her work has been done through the Harvard program on negotiation. And we did post a bio on the webpage of Building Bridges, but you'll also find a link in the chat for later, please, because I'm most eager and privileged to turn this workshop over to Florrie right now. Thank you all.
Hey, thank you, Lise, and thank you, Meg. So one of my most flattering credentials here is my 40-year friendship with Meg. And we've had a lot of conversations, some very deep, some very light, all welcome. So I'm going to just, before I begin, excuse myself. I was at a Seder last weekend with 6 children under 6. My family is growing. These are not my children. These are grandnieces and nephews. And so like most children that age, they've all picked up different things at preschool or school. And I seem to have shared one of them. So I'll be sipping water and so forth, and just excuses or excuse me in advance. So what I'd like to do today in the brief time we have together is go over, first of all, take a very brief look at negotiation generally, which is kind of the main subject that I teach. But as you'll see, it's very broad. So it's not only deal making and business and legal negotiation, but also personal negotiations and difficult conversations that don't necessarily have to end in a particular action or agreement, but just to increase understanding and connection. So we will go briefly then over active listening, which I know that Penny Welsh covered in a previous program. So this will just be a review for those of you who were there and possibly new for those who weren't. And then look at the other side of equation. So obviously in communication, you've got speaking and you've got listening. And listening is often taught, but and the content of speaking, but sort of thinking about what goes wrong in speaking and how can you make connections when, by definition, you're in a conversation with someone you disagree with, sometimes very, very, very strongly or passionately. So I'm going to move into slides and start with looking at a definition of negotiation. So I hope this. Okay. Right. Are you seeing? Okay. So let me make that big. Are you seeing just one slide or a bunch of slides?
We see a bunch at the bottom and one, yeah.
Sorry, this is not what I want. Okay. Let me try something else.
It's not very distracting that way, though. If you,
I think it is. That's not what I would prefer. So
okay.
let me try this again and move to. Better?
Yeah.
Okay. So unfortunately, I can't see you. So if somebody is raising their hand or sorry about that.
We can let you know if somebody's raising their hand.
Okay.
One of our hosts can, like Lisa.
Okay. Sorry about that. Oh. Can you still see the slides?
No,
You can, okay. I got you back and now good.
Now we see,
Mhm.
now we see your screen.
And there's just one slide, right?
Yes.
Oh, no. You know what?
Well, now we see several screens,
Yes.
slides.
All right, so I don't know why this is happening, but I'm just going to do the slides differently. Sorry about this. Okay, so communicating more effectively when we disagree. This is not going to work. I really apologize. This is very annoying for you. And
I wonder if Crystal, does she have a copy of your slides?
now you're seeing just one.
Yeah,
Okay, all right, that's, I still can't see you and I apologize for that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is define what I mean by negotiation. And that's any interaction or communication between two or more parties who perceive a difference in what their interests or perspectives are, and the purpose of it being to influence or persuade. So in a negotiation, obviously, where you hope you're going to either get an agreement or agree on an action that you'll take together, you want to persuade them to do it in a way that's beneficial for you. In a conversation like the ones that I think many of you have been preparing to have, which is a conversation about some political issue or public issue where you disagree with someone, the purpose may be, the intention may be just to have each of you understand each other's perspective better and to create more trust and more connection. Important to know what your goal is. But in any event, the point is that it's any interaction or communication. And you notice that on the slide, I have pictures of people doing different things, because sometimes we communicate merely with body language. We often use words, we sometimes use writing, email, etc. So, but sometimes we use body language as well. And sometimes our body language and our words are in conflict. They contradict each other. And studies have shown that when there is that kind of a conflict, people tend to believe the body language more than the words. So if I say, oh, that's really interesting, and I'm not looking at you and I'm kind of fiddling around with something, you're going to think this person doesn't think what I'm saying is very interesting, even if that's what I've said. So given that broad definition, it's clear that negotiations happen all the time. For those of you who are thinking, you know, I'm an artist, I'm not in a business where I negotiate, or I work at home alone. I don't deal with other people or negotiate. I would say that's not true. And that if you have children, if you have other family members, if you have friends, if you're in any kind of organization, which obviously you are, you negotiate probably all the time. And in fact, we even negotiate with ourselves, right? You know, we say like, okay, I'll just watch one more episode of White Lotus and then I'll make myself get back to that report. So we make little deals with each other all the time. So sometimes negotiating is simply about the way that we ask for something. You know, we kind of, without even being very strategic about it, we know what would be easy for the other party to say yes to. And we ask our question in a way that will make it very easy for them to give us what we want. So there's an old story about there's a young priest in a seminary who says to the Father Superior, "Father, may I smoke while I'm praying?" And the Father Superior says, "No, you can't." And then another seminarian says, "Father, may I pray while I'm smoking?" And what does the Father Superior say? "Of course, my son." So I've been telling this story for years. So it's such a good example of framing for fishing for a yes. And then there's a wonderful movie called The Two Popes that many of you may have seen. And one, it's about Pope Francis and Pope Benedict. And Pope Francis ends up telling this story to Pope Benedict in the movie. So anyway, even though we do negotiate all the time, I'd say it often, even typically, creates anxiety. So one reason it creates anxiety is we worry that we won't get what we want and that we'll feel disappointed or resentful. On the other hand, we worry that we're going to do great and the other person will feel taken and that the relationship will be harmed. And another reason negotiations are complicated is because in every simple negotiation, even like, you know, deciding with a couple of friends where you're going to go out for lunch together, we end up negotiating three things at once. We call these the three domains of negotiation. So the first thing is the substance. And that is, you know, what it's kind of the stuff you're negotiating over. What is the price? What is the location that you're talking about, choosing between? What is the quantity, contract terms, and so forth. And I would say that most certainly in professional negotiations, people are very well prepared on the substance. They know what the numbers are, they know what the various deal terms are that they want. And so there's the substance, and that's sort of the obvious surface stuff. But the second thing in every negotiation is the process, and that's how does it take place? So what medium are you using for the negotiation? Are you having a meeting face to face? Are you doing it on the phone, over email? Are you sending documents back and forth with corrections? So that's the medium. Then, you know, who are the parties at the table? Where are they meeting? How are they seated? You know, do you have everybody on one side of the table, everybody on the other side of the table, or are people kind of mixed up with each other? How is the agenda set, the time frame, and so forth? So all that, all of those are process decisions. And the thing that's interesting is that the process can determine the outcome as much or more than the substance. So if you think about things like the current struggle that's going on in North Carolina to determine who actually got elected to the state Supreme Court. I'm sure many of you have been are aware of that or are following that story. It's really a process question, isn't it? It's because it's what are the rules to qualify people to vote and which ones are supposed to count. If it was the election board that made the mistake, should voters be penalized and so forth. So process is very, very important. And it can be determinative of the way things go in the negotiation or conversation. And it's also people, if a process feels like it was just imposed on people, they may feel like very dissatisfied, even if they get a good outcome. People report greater satisfaction with negotiated outcomes, even when they get worse substantive deals, if they feel that the process that was used to get there was open and fair. So in our presidential elections, up until Trump, you know, people may have been very disappointed with the process. Well, Bush v. Gore may be another exception. And no matter how disappointed the candidates were, you know, they accepted the process and then moved on if they lost. But people feel it's very important to think about a fair process, and part of that is because of the third domain of negotiation, which is the relationship. So what do we mean by the relationship in a negotiation? It's not whether you're friends or like each other, don't like each other. It's how do the parties manage their differences? And that's really what we're going to be focusing on, is how do people in a negotiation or just a discussion or difficult conversation manage their differences effectively. So if you succeed on this relationship parameter, the relationship at the end of the negotiation or conversation should be improved, or at least not harmed. It should be at least as good as it was before you started. And the advice that we would give, and when I say we, I mean those of us who teach negotiation, particularly in the program at Harvard, is first of all to be, as long as you can, unconditionally constructive on the relationship and separate the people from the problem. In other words, if you have what feels like an intractable problem, don't blame the other side for the difficulty. Try and work with them, look for commonality, common interests, and focus on solving the problem together. Speak for yourself, not for them, means if you're feeling frustrated, for example, say, you know, I'm feeling frustrated because we just can't seem to get past this particular difficulty or disagreement, as opposed to, you know, you are just being an obstreperous jerk. So you can describe your own experience of what's going on, but don't make assumptions about what's going on for them or put it on them. And then be purposeful in your communication, meaning if it's a difficult situation, think about what will be most helpful to say, and prepare for it. And then at various points, I'm sorry, just losing it here. At various points, well, we'll be talking about other choices that you can make about asking questions. So I just want to show you a very brief film clip in terms of being constructive on the relationship and looking for commonality, as opposed, even if your differences on the substance of the negotiation are huge. So this is a short clip from a film that was made about Secretary Wendy Sherman. She was Deputy Secretary of State under Obama for the United States, and then head of the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School of Government here at Harvard. And she's taught practice of public leadership. She was director of the Center for Public Leadership at the Kennedy School as well. And when she was Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, she was the lead negotiator on the Iran nuclear deal, which, if you recall, was one that had gone on for years and was finally settled under Obama, and then undone by his successor. And so Sherman here is talking about her experience of dealing with Muslims. She was raised as an Orthodox Jew, her experience dealing with Muslims and men in a situation where they're men from a culture where women did not usually have leadership roles.
An integral part of achieving this success was Ambassador Sherman's ability to foster deeply human connections with those across the table from her. Her Iranian counterparts were all men, and coming from a conservative Islamic culture, would not permit themselves to shake her hand. She related this experience to having grown up in an Orthodox Jewish community where similar customs prevail.
I took an occasion on the margins of one of our negotiating rounds to say, you know, this is not new to me. I grew up in a Jewish community, and among Orthodox Jewish men, they don't shake my hands either, even though we came from very different places and would continue to come from very different places and fight vigorously for our country's national interests. In that moment, we could see each other. I think in most situations in life, when we have interpersonal relations, it's good to find some common ground because we're all different. We all come from different backgrounds and from different places. And finding common ground doesn't mean you're going to solve the problem that's in front of you. We needed to understand that we were human beings and that we each did have some places that were the same.
Okay. So the advice was be purposeful in your communication. And again, in negotiation, but when we talk about communication, we mean any kinds of exchange of thoughts or messages or information. So it can be speech, writing, your body language, physical cues, or other actions. And what's important is that the message you send, that message that you intend to transmit, is actually the message that's received by the other side, and vice versa, that you fully understand the message that they're sending. So when I think about this, this feature of negotiation, I often think about the very clever person who figured out how to write the word ambulance on the front of an ambulance. And I'm just going to ask you to say what's unusual about that. If someone could just unmute themselves and suggest what that is.
It was from the perspective of the person in front of the ambulance looking backwards.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so and these are pictures of ambulances from many different countries, several different countries. And as you can see, somebody thought, yeah, this is an important message. You know, it's an emergency. It needs to be understood clearly by somebody who's driving down the road in front of the ambulance. And so hopefully they're not turning around and looking behind them. If they're going to in a mirror. And so the word ambulance was written in a mirror image. So I would say that think about what your purpose is and how the recipient will hear what you have to say, and just remember, you know, be brilliant like the person who first thought of writing ambulance backwards. I was traveling with a colleague who's also a friend, and we've gone to a number of different countries together, and he speaks only English, and I speak a couple of different languages, but we happen to be in a country where neither of us spoke the language. And he would go over to someone if we were lost, for example, and say, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" And if they didn't respond, he would say, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" And after this happened a couple of times, I said, "You know, Bob, I don't think this is a volume problem. I think it's a language problem." And, you know, we were laughing about it, and then thought, you know, so many times, you know, when people disagree, or if you're in a negotiation, it's starting to feel tense. That's what we do. We say the same thing, but louder, you know, or more aggressively, as opposed to thinking, you know, maybe I should express this in a way that's easier for the other side to understand. So So as I said, it's important not only to make sure that the other party hears your message correctly, but to make sure that you hear theirs. And so we're going to move into a very cursory look. Oops, sorry. One more slide. Okay. Tailor your words and tone to the needs of your audience and combine advocacy with a lot of inquiry. In other words, if you want to be convincing, don't just keep making your own arguments about why your position is correct or why your product is so great. Actually, researchers who have studied good sales, the top sales people and what techniques they used that were effective, found that, talking, like making arguments for why their thing was great actually was very irritating to the other side, and that the top salespeople asked questions like 50% of the time. They had to figure out, what is it that this person actually needs, and how does what I have to sell meet that need for them? And that then they can show them how it meets their need. It should be about them, not about you. So, so now combining advocacy with inquiry, we're going to look at active listening. So, a former student of mine who had been, an FBI hostage negotiator. He was actually a Kennedy School student who was taking my course at the law school. And that's obviously, hostage negotiation is one of the edgiest, most life and death kinds of negotiations. It's life and death. And when he returned to the FBI afterwards, he wrote a manual of techniques for hostage negotiation. And he referred to active listening, which he had learned in our course, as the stealth weapon of negotiation. So by active listening, what we mean is not only listening and hearing, but also giving feedback to the speaker. That's the active part, to show that you're hearing the complete message that the speaker expressed. So you create what's sometimes called an empathy loop. So it's a communication loop that assures you that you've gotten what the speaker has said and shows them that you have, or it gives them a chance to correct you if you haven't, or if you've missed something. So, so what's helpful about it? First of all, one of the key principles in negotiation is that the interests of the parties should be met in order for an agreement to hold and to be a good agreement, a successful agreement. And when we say interest, we mean not just, like, I want $5 for this mug. That's a position, but the underlying factors that move people to negotiate, wanting fairness. And some of those factors are intangible. They're not things like, getting money or getting a job. It's something intangible, like feeling respected, feeling appreciated, and feeling heard. When people speak, they want to feel heard. So by actively listening, it makes people feel heard. And research has shown that people not only feel good about that, but they also feel more trust for the person that's actually making them feel that way. You learn new information about them, so this can be helpful. If you want to create connections, you want to understand why somebody believes the way they do, learning that information can come from active listening. They'll be more likely to listen to you. People get I'm sure all of you have been in situations where somebody is, they act like they're listening, but they're just waiting for their turn to tell you why their point of view is correct. And they're not really listening to what you're saying. So if you can listen empathically, actively, and let them know they were heard, that anxiety about, but I've got to get my arguments out there, will be assuaged, and they'll be more likely to really listen to you. Breaking the cycle of argument. sometimes people will argue around and around because we're working on different assumptions about something without even inquiring. When I think of this point, I remember once being in Hong Kong, and I was meeting a friend at a big mall in Hong Kong, and he had said, let's meet at the Starbucks. And so I went into the mall, I asked people, found the Starbucks, waiting. My friend wasn't there. And finally, he called me and said, where are you? You know, we were supposed to meet 10 minutes ago. I said, I'm at the Starbucks. Where are you? He says, I'm at the Starbucks. Well, it turned out there was 2 Starbucks in the mall. And he had meant the one that he usually went to, which I had no way of knowing. So we were just arguing about, no, you're late. And we were both on time, just at the wrong Starbucks. And then maybe an attitude will change, and you will be in agreement or see things the same way. So if it's so important, and why are people such ineffective listeners? What makes active listening difficult? So to illustrate the first problem, we're going to look at another short video clip. This one is from the 2016 vice presidential debate between Tim Kaine and Mike Pence, which some of you may have seen. So this was a clip, there were 2 cameras on them. And so this is happening simultaneously. So I'm going to ask you to see how much of what both of them are saying, or either of them is saying, can you understand from this clip?
Paid a few taxes and lost $1 million a year. You are Donald Trump's apprentice. Let me talk about this.
Senator, I think I'm still on my time.
Well, isn't this a discussion?
So I'd wager that that none of you understood what both of them were saying, and possibly not even what either of them was saying. So what does this have to do with, and this is normal because our brain is hardwired to follow only one stream of speech at a time. So for those of you who are thinking, yeah, but I can watch 2 movies at once, you're clicking back and forth from one to the other. You're not, you have sequential bits of each movie. We can't stay focused on 2 flows of speech at once. So what does this have to do with active listening? Oops. So it turns out that each of us has an internal voice that's chattering away pretty much all the time in our head, including when someone else is talking to us. So some of you may be thinking, what is she talking about? I don't have an internal voice, right? And that is your internal voice that's saying that. So not surprisingly, when someone is saying something that we disagree with, our internal voice tends to take our point of view, not theirs. So, and especially when a situation is tense, if you're in a negotiation or a mediation, or when people disagree about something they care very much about, our internal voices are consuming so much of our attention that they block what the other person is saying. So what do internal voices typically think about or do? One of the things is they judge, right? You're listening to what the other person is saying. It's like, oh my God, you are so wrong. You just are clueless. Or we're preparing a response, a defense, arguments, problem solving. Somebody is complaining about something, and meanwhile you're working out everything in their life that's not going well and just waiting to give them the recipe for happiness. Or thinking about other situations that were analogous and then anticipating where they're going with their what they're saying, as opposed to being present and listening. This kind of goes back to the way that Meg opened the session, being present and actually listening. Or they may just be daydreaming, thinking about something completely extraneous to the whatever the other person is saying. So one of the things that makes listening so difficult is that we get distracted by our internal voice. And I think I am not going to do this because I can't see. So another thing is that we have a very strong tendency to see our own view as correct or more enlightened. So there are a number of what we call, what are called cognitive biases, which are kind of brain tics that are just the way that our brains developed, our thinking processes developed. And one of them is the what you might call the overconfidence bias. And that means that if we believe something and the other person believes something different, first of all, we know where we got the information that we base our belief on. We trust ourselves. And so we just assume that if there is a difference, we're right. That's our go-to position. And so that means that it makes listening to a different perspective more difficult because we're just assuming it's wrong. We also have misconceptions about what it takes to be a good listener. One of them is that it's simply an ability to hear. So this is a cartoon where the wife is saying to the husband's watching a football game with a remote, and the wife has obviously been saying, "You're not listening to me," and he says, "Of course, I'm paying attention." I press the mute button. So it's also not necessarily agreeing or even being nice, nicey nice, fake nice, or it's not just, doing some of the rote ritualistic behaviors like nodding or saying or developing a talent for repeating the last two sentences someone said, like a tape recorder. Something my husband used to do that made me crazy. So in this cartoon, the wife is saying to the husband, "You can stop saying, I stopped talking to you an hour ago." I have a little collection of active listening cartoons, usually bad listening cartoons. And unfortunately, or sad commentary on marriage is that most of them seem to be couples. So there are also some unhelpful assumptions that we have about the consequences of listening. We think that it will look weak if we listen and don't just, get out there and like a gladiator and make arguments. We think, well, how can I persuade them if I'm listening? I have to make my arguments, get them out there. They might think I'm agreeing, or, oh my gosh, they might persuade me if I listen to what they say. So more helpful assumptions might be, I can learn if I'm listening. I will satisfy their interest in being understood. It'll make it easier for them to listen to me. And of course, I can listen without agreeing. So what is the advice for listening? What are the skills that we need? So there are kind of two categories of skills. One are internal skills, or things that happen in your head. That if we were making a video of you listening, we wouldn't see you doing these things. And they are, first of all, remind yourself what your purpose is. You're trying to understand what the other person's thinking, what's important to them, and make a connection. So you just have to remind yourself to be curious. And try and keep track, this is related, of your internal voice. You can't turn your internal voice off, sadly, perhaps, but you can realign it, especially if you notice your mind is wandering, just bring it back. For those of you who have ever done meditation, it's very similar to, paying attention to your breathing. And then, of course, your mind wanders to the past or the future, and then you just bring it back to the moment. So realign it. my mind often wanders, and I've, in my experience, when I realize, I've kind of lost the thread of what someone's saying, and I do want to really hear what they're saying, I'll just say, be very transparent about it and say, I'm sorry, I was thinking about what you said before, what you were saying earlier, and I've pretty much missed everything you've said since, and then tell them what the last thing I remember was. Say, would you mind repeating it? And I've never had anyone either refuse to do that or even seem annoyed about it. Maybe they thought I was a bit of a space shot, but people are talking because they want you to hear them. And so if you're admitting that you've failed and that you want to backtrack, they're usually happy to help out. So you need to resist the urge to just be responding to judging, arguing, or giving advice, and really hearing what they're saying and also the emotions underneath it. And be aware of what you've been assuming about them and recognize that your assumptions aren't the only ones that may make sense. And doing all of this while trying to be authentic and really be present in the conversation. These are very easy to say and harder to do, often very hard to do. But I will say that being aware of these internal skills and trying to practice them, pick one or two and really try and practice them, you'll develop. It's like working on a golf swing or a tennis swing or playing the piano. The more you do it, the more naturally it will come. And then you'll start doing it reflexively without even thinking, oh, I need to do this. So what are the external skills? So the triumvirate, the three pillars of active listening are paraphrasing, inquiry, and acknowledgement. So paraphrasing is restating what you heard the other person say without necessarily agreeing. These are examples of paraphrasing. Let me make sure I got this right. And then first you believe this, then that, the third leads so and so. So for people that, this is particularly helpful for people that tend to talk in volumes and pages rather than in sentences and paragraphs, to just say, and again, I'll sometimes just interrupt and say, can I just jump in here? You've made a bunch of points. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So what I heard you say is, A, B, C, D. And again, if somebody is just going on and on and on, it's easy for you to drift off. This way, first of all, you can check and make sure you didn't miss something. It gives them a chance to correct you or fill in what you may have left out. And secondly, it puts you back in the conversation. So it's another kind of hidden advantage of active listening, is that it can turn what may had started out as a conversation, ended up as a lecture, back into a conversation. The second of the pillars is inquiry, which is asking open-ended questions to learn more about their perspective and test your assumptions. So by open-ended questions, they're typically questions like that begin with often the W questions, what, well, this is not a W question, how, would you say more about that? I'll come up with more W's. Questions that are information gathering questions. It's not that yes or no questions are bad, but those are more like paraphrasing questions, where you're restating something. But for broad information gathering questions, ask open-ended questions that aren't judgy questions. I love this quote. Many of you may be familiar with Krista Tippett from NPR's On Being show. And she's an amazing interviewer. And her comment about questions is that questions elicit answers that are in their likeness. That if you ask a good question, you're likely to get a good answer. If you ask a bad, narrow question, you'll get a bad, narrow answer. And then it's hard to resist a generous question, a question that's really giving the other party an opportunity to talk about what's important to them. So one word of caution, which is to beware of things that sound like questions, but they're really advocacy or making arguments in the guise of questions. So, don't you think it makes more sense for the feds to pay for disaster relief than the states? You don't really think that'll work, do you? So these are obviously, we can tell from these questions that the questioner has a very different point of view from the speaker. So you should ask yourself when you're actively listening, what's the purpose of this question? And if it isn't to learn something, then you might consider not asking it. Okay, and the third pillar of active listening is acknowledgement, and that's showing an understanding of the other person's feelings by reflecting them back. So these are examples of acknowledgement. Often we do it. So it's not that every feeling needs to be acknowledged, but sometimes you realize you're getting stuck someplace because the other person is having a very strong feeling about what you're discussing, and they're not talking about it, and it's kind of blocking them from moving forward, either solving a problem or just making any headway or listening to you. So we often hesitate because particularly if we know they're having a negative feeling and that it's either about us, about something we did, or that somehow we're implicated in it. Most of us, I would say, are uncomfortable in the face of someone else's negative feelings. And so we feel like, oh, if I mention they're having this bad feeling, it's going to be like pulling the cork out of the bottle and this terrible genie is going to come out. And that may happen. I mean, by referring to the feeling, you may give them leeway to say, well, yes, I was very disappointed. But then, as research has shown, they will be able to kind of calm down and then move on and have a conversation in a much less blocked way, or go on to problem solving or continuing to negotiate. So sometimes this naming of an emotion, the reason that it works actually has a neurological basis that was sort of discovered or first written about by a psychologist, Dan Siegel, who was working with kids who had a lot of trouble controlling their behavior. And he was studying the neurological responses to he had actually had them say what they were feeling. And what happened was, these emotional and reactive responses are coming from the nether, deeper parts of the brain, the old sort of lizard part of our brain. And by just saying the name of the emotion, it put the brain activity into the forward part of the brain, the cognitive analytical part of the brain, and they were able to get on top of just being swayed by their emotion. So for those of you who feel very uncomfortable, I mean, there are a bunch of little tricks that you can use if you feel uncomfortable, either in a negotiation or a conversation that's getting heated, is just you don't even have to say it out loud, name your own feelings. It's not just the other person's feelings, but by naming your own emotions, again, it puts your brain activity into moves it from the emotional, part of your brain to the cognitive, analytical, problem-solving part of your brain, and will make you feel less anxious because you'll be able to work with it better. So I am going to just stop screen sharing for a moment because we're coming to an inflection point, and I'm very sorry that I haven't been able to see you. Does anyone have questions about that, or Penny? I know you're an expert on this, so I hope it hasn't contradicted anything that you teach or understand.
Not at all. And I'm loving what you are saying and amplifying what we've been talking about in building bridges already. What you're saying is very much amplifying it and doing a much better job of presenting it. Thank you. I'm loving this name it to tame it thing. The idea of, well, for myself, I'm an emotional person and I don't contain my emotions very well. So if I'm arguing something with somebody else, if I can say to myself, oh, you're getting pretty excited, can you calm it down? That helps. It just sort of, yeah, it tames it. Thank you.
I'm feeling so anxious, or I'm feeling attacked, and that feels uncomfortable. It just, again, it's you become more cognitive and less emotional. One note about that, name it to tame it. Since I do trainings often with professional groups, I can see people when I talk about acknowledging, they're thinking like, I could never say to my boss, oh, you seem really angry. Because a lot of times, especially, on stronger emotions, people don't like to be called on it because it sounds like, they won't own up to it because they feel like you're saying, you're out of control, buddy. And so, I mean, I have a short list of what I call office appropriate emotions. And very often I'll kind of translate anger into frustrated or disappointed, or etc. So, things that are close to it. But again, just by naming it or saying, yes, I see you're having this emotion, it will bring the level down, and put things on a more rational problem-solving basis. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. All right, well, now,
What's the inflection point?
for some reason I have, oh, because I'm not screen sharing. Oh, the inflection point is moving into assertion. So, yeah, now we've covered again, very quickly listening, and if being the recipient of speech and messages. Now, how do you what are ways of thinking about communicating your messages effectively when you disagree? So going back to screen sharing. So goodbye. Oh, I have to remember which one I do. Okay. All right. Oh my gosh. I now I can see you. That's great.
Terrific.
So, so now it's your turn to speak, and we're going to look at, what happens when we have one of these difficult conversations. And first of all, what is a difficult conversation? So it's any kind of conversation that we dread, that makes us anxious, that we avoid, that provokes strong emotions, and that we just experience as hard to have. So it can be an emotion, a negotiation. It could be a personal conversation. It could be, a conversation that you've set up with folks on different political persuasions, to talk about that. So any of those conversations, it can be someone you love. So typically what happens is when we start out, we feel bad. We feel like, you know, I should bring this thing up. And then we start thinking, but oh my gosh, it's going to go badly. I'm going to feel bad. They're going to get angry. Something's going to go wrong. It's going to break down. It's not going to help anyway. Is that worth it? Nah, I won't raise it. And then we continue feeling bad. So I see the, yep, I've been there, smiles on some of your faces. I think this happens to all of us, right? Because we all are caring people, and these are hard. So why does it feel this way? So one of them is that we have disagreements on facts. One of them is that we confuse intentions with the bad impact that something has had on us. Another is that we look to the past and we think, you know, there's been an injury and blame, and we worry about either blaming someone, getting angry about that, or being blamed ourselves. So what we're going to look at very quickly is the 3 shifts going from certainty, I am right and you are wrong, to curiosity, from intentions to talking about impact, and from blame to joint contribution. So this material is played out much more fully and eloquently in the book Difficult Conversations by Bruce Patton, Sheila Heen, and Doug Stone, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, and if not read. This is a book that I've given away so many copies of this because it's very, very helpful and a good read. So the shift from certainty to curiosity. So partisan perceptions is just the way that we have different perceptions of what actually happened, what the facts are, what reality is. And this obviously can lead to big disagreements about, you know, how do you deal with this situation if you don't even see that the situation, that the facts underlying the situation are the same. So why does this happen? What are the causes of this? First of all, we don't all have the same experience. We have different, we live in different situations. We have different kinds of experiences. Even, for example, those of you who are on the Zoom, I mean, if I said, you know, if someone asked you, oh, how was that talk? For someone who was just sitting there and it's like, it was fine. Somebody else, the phone might have been ringing, their dog was barking, or somebody was calling for them in the house. They feel very frustrated and they said, oh, it was very annoying. So we all just have different data of things that are happening. And not only that, but we each pay attention to different data. So I'm going to do a little exercise. And if you've done this before, please don't answer. I mean, of course, you can watch the clip, but please don't respond. So this is just a simple counting exercise. I'm going to show you a video clip with 2 basketball teams. I can hear some of you have already seen this. And I want you to count how many times are the people in the white, there's some of the people have white t-shirts, some have black t-shirts. How many times are the people in the white t-shirts passing the ball to each other? Okay, so just count the number of times the ball is passed by someone in the white t-shirt. Okay, here we go. Okay. So you, All right, it's not gonna work. So, how many people counted 11 and no more? 12? 13? Okay, 1, 13, 14? 15? 16? More than 16? Okay. Excuse me. Well, it turns out it was 16. There were 16 passes of people in the white t-shirts. Did anyone notice anything unusual in that video that happened? Anyone that hasn't seen it before? No? Did anyone notice, anyone who has not seen the video before, did you notice that there was a gorilla walking through? No? Do you believe that there was a gorilla walking through? I'm going to show it to you again. Here we go. So watch for the gorilla. There he is. Gorilla.
No.
And it turns out that actually at the same time, the curtain changes from red to yellow and one of the players leaves. But we'll just stick with the gorilla. So this is a phenomenon called inattention blindness. We literally don't see what we're not looking for. In fact, you know how we say, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. It's actually, I'll see it when I believe it. So in real life, different people observe the things that we think are important, and we tend not to notice other things, even though they're there. And that's why we often select different data. So, you know, when I start a new class, I'll notice if it's a group of law students, you know, some of the men are looking at some of the women in the class. I mean, you know, people are looking at different things that they're interested in. If people who are interested in fashion might be looking at, you know, what are the other people wearing, and not notice certain things about them because they're focused on that. And this inattention blindness is something that, you know, it's because we have only, unfortunately, attention is a commodity we have only a limited supply of, and we can't spread it over too many things. So I directed you to pay attention to the people in the white t-shirts passing, and I think nobody who hadn't seen this before noticed the gorilla, if I'm correct. Usually about 50% miss it. And it turns out that if the task is made more complicated, so for example, the experimenters who developed this video, Dan Simons and his colleagues, they said, keep 2 tallies, one for those who were passing overhand and one who were passing underhand, you know, kind of bouncing. And 80% missed the gorilla. So there, you know, it's the more attention you need to pay to something, the less you have available for other things. And I can't resist showing this, even though we're tight on time. There was a study that was done at Harvard Medical School by Harvard Medical School researchers, and they did it at the Brigham when it was just the Brigham. And they sent a scan. It's a CT scan, 5 lung CT scans, and each one of those CT scans had about 10 abnormalities on it, and they sent it to about 50 radiologists So some of them were expert examiners from the American Board of Radiology, some were from the Brigham, and they were asked to look at those scans and see what they found and click on anything strange. So here is the scan. And does anyone see anything odd on that scan? Let me help you.
Oh. Gorilla.
That was on the scan. And it's about 5 times as big as any of the abnormalities that they were supposed to look at. And no, I'm sorry, 48 times the size of the abnormalities. And only 83% of them did not see it, because they were so focused on looking for something that they, had an idea of what it should look like, that they didn't even see it. Now, for those of you who are thinking, oh yeah, well, oops, it's not that obvious because it's dark. They did it again with a red gorilla and they still didn't notice it. So go figure. So you know where you might not want to go get your scans, or avoid breathing in gorillas. So, this, the point for us is that we pay attention to different data, and we also pay attention to the data that confirm what we already believe, right? When we read stuff online or we read newspapers, the things that really stick are the things that confirm what our existing beliefs are, or our experiences, and we shut out what differs. So we have this selection process going on, and then we interpret the data differently too. So we tell different stories based on the same data. So here's an example. Let's imagine there is a story in one newspaper that says, the headline is this: overbearing forest residents terrorize lost girl, force her to abandon temporary shelter. On the same day, in a newspaper of a different persuasion, the story is this: juvenile delinquent breaks into absent family's home, wantonly destroys furniture. Does that ring a bell with anyone? So it all depends on your point of view. I mean, I don't know how many of you ever look at, Truth Social, for example, Donald Trump's social media thing, site. The same events are covered in Blue Sky, for example, which is a progressive version of Twitter. That is the only one I read now, so that I won't have agita every day. But the same events, completely different perspectives on them. Okay, so we interpret data differently. We tell different stories. The victims in one or the villains in the other. And then group dynamics reinforce these different perceptions. So depending on whether you do read Truth Social or Blue Sky, it'll confirm. If you're reading Blue Sky, it just kind of shores up what you already believe. Or if you tend to get together with friends of the same political persuasion, you kind of ramp up each other's beliefs and reinforce them. So there's a explanatory tool that helps make sense of the partisan perceptions we call the ladder of inference. And the idea is that when we try to make sense of the world, we select, here's all the available data possible. We might not all perceive the same data, but even if we had exactly the same, we select certain data which others may ignore. Then this gets kind of filtered or passed through our reasoning, our thought processes, our experience, and then we come out with conclusions. And the problem is that so people tend to argue on the basis of conclusions. the Democrats aren't doing anything. Well, yeah, here are all the things the Democrats are doing plenty, instead of giving the data that the conclusions are based on, and then, what are the filters that we pass them through to lead to those conclusions. So the yeah, so what's important in having a conversation is for you to give not only your conclusions, but also give the data that you base those conclusions on, and what your interpretation is. What are the principles that you're selecting the data and analyzing them on. And then if another person is just giving you a conclusion, kind of, we call it pushing them down the ladder or walking them down the ladder, ask them, so, what is this based on? What, what's, you say that transgender people are ruining women's sports. What are the data that you have that support this? Where is this coming from? Okay. So general advice, improve your self-awareness, like be aware of what you're paying attention to, what you may have missed, what are your biases, try and understand their perception, and then communicate your view fully, and then frame where you want to get to as a joint problem. So I think what I'm going to do is, I'm sorry, I'm going to just jump through to the very last part, because I want to leave time for questions. Is thinking about when you're embarking on a difficult conversation, how do you start? And very often one of the stumbling block is, how do I even get into this? I've tried talking to this person, or you just have a fight about something, and you don't even know how to start talking about it in a different way. An example from my life is my mother, my late mother. She died a few months ago at 101. She and I both enjoy cooking very much, and we actually like cooking together.
Wow.
But there would be times when I would be, making something, and, she would be sort of standing and watching and saying, why don't you do this? Or why don't you do it that way? And I would just get so annoyed and say, I know what I'm doing. And we'd have this exchange over and over again. And I'd feel really bad about being, a mean daughter, and, she would feel hurt. And so, finally, I kind of used this approach and thought, what would be a different way of talking about this? And actually, what would be a different time to talk about this, as opposed to, in the middle of cooking, maybe just talk about the way that we had this conversation. So I have an example here, imagining that you're talking to an elderly father who says, I'm not going to get a shingles vaccine. And you say, Dad, you have to do it. And, you've been having a fight about it. So one typical way of starting that conversation that doesn't usually work out very well is, I'm really upset that you won't get the shingles vaccine. There's no reason not to. Shingles is painful. Plus, if you get sick, I'll be the one who has to take care of you. So this is what we often do, right? We just put all of our perfectly good reasons for wanting the person to do what we want out there. So let me ask you, what are the messages that you're implying when you talk to, in this situation, imagining this situation? What are the messages that you're communicating to this man implicitly? Meg?
That he doesn't know. anything.
Right.
And that he's being selfish.
Yeah, you're clueless, you're selfish. Anything else? Yeah. So, I mean, here's my prefabricated, you don't know how to make health decisions. You do stupid stuff for no reason. Your well-being is a big drain on me. So, and then you can imagine, if I were filling out a column for, what he might then think, well, like you, daughter, are selfish, or, you, son, if it's a man. So the way, a better way of thinking about this is think about what is my purpose here? I at least want to understand more, why is he not doing this? I want him to understand, what my reasons are. Maybe see if we can come to an agreement about something, but at least have a reasonable conversation about it. So the suggestion I have here, which is longer, is, Dad, and again, this is not at a time when you're just trying to drag him off to CVS to get this vaccine or wherever he goes, Dad, I know we've had different views about vaccines, and I have been dismissive about it in the past. So this is like owning your contribution to the tension. I've been concerned about how tough it would be for you and for all of us if you got shingles. So would you be willing to talk about that with me? And then, hopefully get him to buy into having a conversation, trying not to blame, doing a lot of asking and listening, and seeing what the perspective is there. So anyway, I find when I have a difficult conversation coming up, I mean, whether it's with one person or more than one person, I mean, usually one person is the hardest in a sense, because it's usually somebody that I'm in a close relationship with and care very much about the relationship. I'm going to just stop sharing. Then I will think about, how can I open? I mean, what are the messages that I really want to communicate, and try and frame them. Think about how can I frame them in a way that will also, show some connection, show that we have some shared interest. I'll look for the shared interests and think about, what are the things they may be concerned about in this situation, and bring them up. And sometimes even practice with a friend, especially if I have a friend. It may sound silly, but if it's a really important conversation and you really, really tense about having it, it helps to practice. So when Elena Kagan was the dean, now Justice Kagan, at the law school, there was something I wanted from her. And I had a meeting set up to talk about it. And she was notorious tough negotiator. I mean, she could get really nasty. So I was terrified of having this conversation, and the stakes were very high for me as well. And so I practiced with a friend who was a colleague, who my friend Bob, who had a number of negotiations with her. And he played her, and he I said, just give it to me, like what you think the worst things are that she could say. And there were a couple of points that he made that sounded very plausible, as plausible in terms of being able to, that's something that she would say. And there were times when my mouth was just opening and closing like a fish and no words were coming out, because I was so like, but we talked about, if she said that, what might be a helpful response. So first of all, I felt much less anxious when I went into the negotiation, and yeah, it worked out well. I mean, the other thing was I had thought about, what might she want out of this situation, and what could I give her in terms of what she wanted. And I think she was so used to just having people come in and ask for stuff, without really thinking about, what it looked like from her perspective, that just doing the perspective taking and going in where it was clear that I had thought about, what might be challenging for her in this situation. She was just like, whoa, nice. She was great. So preparation is really helpful, even if it feels odd to sit down and actually do a written preparation for a personal conversation. So I did not leave very much time for questions. I apologize for that. I'm a chronic spillover person. But does anyone have anything they want to ask, either sort of general or specific, or? I would say, if having these kinds of conversations is challenging for you, I could actually put together a very short bibliography that I can ask, I guess you, Lisa, to send around and explain what I think is helpful in each of the books. I mean, titles are titles, but there's difficult conversations. My friend Bob of the It's a Language Problem, Not a Volume Problem story is just published a wonderful book called Conflict Resilience, which covers some of this material, but just really talks about not necessarily coming to agreement, but just being able to, excuse me, successfully exist and be creative in the midst of conflict. So it's helpful either if you're preparing to actually negotiate a conflict, or and come to a resolution, or if you're not, or if you're just your goal is really just more understanding and connection. So thank you for your attention during this. Gentlemen,
Pam had a
Question
question.
by Pam.
oh, sorry. Oh,
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you so much, Florrie. This was great. Such a great reminder and some new thoughts around this. I have a very difficult trust with a daughter and with a stepdaughter that left me, and my husband left and her father left. A very difficult trust that we have been arguing about for 4 years now. And a lot of what you have already said has been really helpful. I'm wondering if we'll get a copy of your slides. And then the other thing, I guess my question would be, is it never, I mean, I can see now that we're both stuck in a situation we don't want to be in, and connected for the rest of our life, for the rest of my life. That's very burdensome on both of us. So I want to come back to her. We've been only expressing our own points of view, and come back to her trying to see her point of view, and really recognizing just in your talk that we're both having the same experience, actually. So I guess my question would be, after 4 years, I wonder, like, where would I start? Just a simple, like, just what you said, see her point of view and let her know I'm seeing that it's been as difficult for her as for me. Just, any ideas you have on that would be great.
I do. I mean, first of all, it sounds like, one of the most difficult hurdles, which is your being able to empathize with the fact that it's been difficult for her, is something that you've already passed. And I think, first of all, acknowledging the fact that there, it's been rough going, that this has been going on for a long time. And I'm sure, it's been abrasive to your relationship, and just hard for both of you. And just owning that. And, if there's anything specifically that you can take, is responsibility for as your contribution to the situation. I always find that when it's a tough situation, even if I think, you know, I'm like 2% responsible and they're 98% responsible, that opening with my own, like, I should have, you know, brought this up sooner. And I'm sorry for that. Owning your own contribution to the problem makes it a lot easier to move into talking about theirs and then thinking about how can you move forward. And
Right. Our conversations have been mostly through council and it's been very expensive. So would you recommend that this go through council or still stay outside of council? I guess there's no way you can know.
have you tried mediation?
No, we have not.
So that would be I mean, a really good suggestion. You know, if the thing is with mediation, if the lawyers were nervous about what you might say, they could be present, you know, but have you speak to each other. But a mediator, you know, especially one that's, I mean, there are some mediators that are kind of specialized in dealing with family financial matters. Are, you know, that could be extremely helpful. And then, I mean, the mediator's goal is not really to solve the problem. You know, they want to help solve the problem, but they also want to get the parties talking to each other if it's a relationship that both of them want to continue.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's not that may not be possible, but after this last hour and a half, I can really see that it is possible and should be something we do.
But I mean, it could be that even a letter or email, you know, something that she doesn't have to respond to immediately because her first response may just be like, whoa, you know, what's going on here? She might need time to just refract. That something, you know, just saying how badly you felt and you know that it's really been hard for her and expressing, you know, what you would like in terms of relationship, or saying, you know, even if we don't have one, you know, I don't want to end our relationship on this sour note. And then, you know, is this something we can talk about, or would you consider mediation? So she may not respond, but at least, you know, it's a generous gesture and yeah.
It's a great idea, and everything just blew up in the last week, so this is perfect timing.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so thank you so much.
I wish you luck.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Anything else?
Hello?
Yes, thank you,
Hello.
Amy. Yes, thank you for this wonderful. It reminded me of what I learned a long time ago in advocacy and inquiry. How do we balance the two? But the question I have is, many of us, unfortunately, are in negotiating positions over long distances, so we cannot meet in person. But the choice I have to make from time to time is a Zoom conversation better than a phone conversation? Because it seems to me that body language is very important. It's a way to sense where the person is. Do you agree with that?
I am on Team Gautier as far as that goes. Yes. Either a Zoom or a, you know, FaceTime, or you can do it on WhatsApp. But I think that yeah, it's hard electronically to make as much of a connection, but and especially if they're not just seeing a big head. I mean, like you're kind of in a good distance, you know, where you can sort of gesture and it feels, you know, you can just use a lot more Alain to you know, build a connection. That it's much better.
And thank you for sometimes indeed, and I facilitate a lot of meetings, people are like that. And it deprives me and deprives us of actually seeing more of the person. You know, it's only the upper half, but it's better. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Can we get Cynthia in? Is that okay?
It's fine with me if other people are.
Good. Okay.
I'll move quickly. Thank you for your presentation and especially being sick. I'm home with COVID, so I'm very much feeling for you.
Dear.
I really appreciated how you brought the neuroscience into it. I think that avoiding activation in the limbic brain of the other can allow us to get a lot further. And if we're watching our own activation, my question is, I also have a family situation with my adult son, and I've been trying and trying and trying. When do you typically suggest you've tried enough? What are your markers for enough now? The trying has maybe ceased for self-preservation, and maybe what would be best for him.
Yeah. When you say trying, do you mean trying to talk or
Yeah,
trying?
conversations, letters, and it inevitably breaks down to a not great place.
Mhm. I mean, first of all, I think saying, this is it forever, that, with somebody that's important to you, what's the point? I mean, you can take a break or set some kind of parameter that, would trigger being back in communication again. Maybe make suggestions for, analyze what's gone wrong and say, can we try doing it this other way? And it may be a very artificial kind of thing, maybe, if he's willing to do it. But just, in other words, set some guidelines as opposed to just breaking it off. And I think
That's,
this,
I guess, what I mean, putting boundaries in place to
Yeah.
say, listen, unless this, I can't, I don't want to keep going back and forth like this.
right, but I mean, I guess I think sort of take it or leave it offers are just not helpful.
I think they can be.
You sort of back yourself into a corner.
Yep.
So, and even if you feel like, this seems pretty hopeless, I would at least just frame it as, I would love for this to change. I just need to take a break from this. It may be, and then maybe suggest, what you're going to do about it, or to help heal yourself, or support yourself, and then say, maybe even set a time that you would try again, or say, if you want to try, please.
Yep.
Get in
Okay,
touch.
good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard to, I'm sure there are situations like this, but
It's
I
hard when it's family.
rare that a child really doesn't want to be in contact with the parent, or have some kind of connection with the parent, unless, there's been, horrible treatment, or, yeah. Yeah, I could imagine those situations, but not, yeah, it's a really unusual exception, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Don't close the door.